England have somehow made it to their second European final in a row in what was arguably their best performance of the Euros so far. But the Netherlands didn't make it easy for them, and some extremely clever tactical changes by Koeman completely killed the game in the second half and made it a lot harder for England to find space. Let's take a look. After an extremely slow start at the Euros, England have grown as the competition has progressed, with a better performance against Switzerland and even better performance last night against the Netherlands. But Koeman didn't make it easy for Southgate, and if it weren't for a moment of brilliance by Watkins in the last minute, the game probably would have gone to extra time and penalties. One of the biggest reasons why England's performances have improved in their past few games is because of their switch from a back four to a back three. Because when England started as a back four, it was a lot harder for them to find players between the lines, because you had a lot of players that wanted to receive the ball to feet, especially when it was Trent Alexander-Arnold instead of Mainu in the centre. You had a lot of players that wanted to come deep to collect the ball. Even Harry Kane wanted to collect the ball in his own half. The only player that was consistently ready to attack in behind was Bukayo Saka on the right flank. But as England have switched to a back three, it has meant that they've been more aggressive in possession and has allowed them to stretch the pitch more consistently. Now, there are still a lot of issues on the left flank, specifically with the position of Trippier, and it does look like Luke Shaw, if he's fit, will be the first choice going into the final, as he did play the whole of the second half instead of Trippier on the left. Although the second half was very defensive and it was very cagey, so Shaw's introduction against the Netherlands didn't have a massive impact in this game. But with England in a back three, it has meant that they have more players on the defensive line ready to attack in behind. And it also gives more freedom to their midfielders in Bellingham, Foden, Rice and Mainu. And the reason why they were so dominant in the first 35 minutes against the Netherlands last night was because of this central box in the centre of Declan Rice, Mainu, Foden and Bellingham, which allowed them to completely outnumber Holland's midfield of Schouten, Raiders and Simmons, meaning it was very easy for England to find the free player, and Holland struggled to adapt to this press, because if they wanted to close down the three defenders, it meant that England could very comfortably find one of the free players, with Simmons often being in a 2v1, meaning Reinders might often push up onto Mainu, and then it was Bellingham or Foden, who were very dynamic in their position as well. And you often saw Foden that while he started on the right, he was very comfortable moving over into the left, switching positions with Bellingham, and it worked really well for England because they were always able to find a free player. But even in moments in the first half where Holland were able to level out the centre, then the position of Kane also became important, because we do know that Kane likes to drop deep quite a lot. But in the first half, this position worked quite well, because he would drop into this position here, and you could essentially get a 3v2 with Bellingham, Kane and Foden against Reinders and Schouten in the centre, often disrupting Holland's defensive line and having more players ready to attack in behind. Now, Holland did take the lead after just 7 minutes in the match, but this was more down to an individual moment of brilliance from Simmons, who was able to beat Pickford and put the Netherlands 1-0 up early on in the match. But England were still on top for the first 35 minutes of the match. And a lot of England's chances came because they were much more comfortable in pushing a lot of players forward. Specifically on the right flank with Bukayo Saka, Kyle Walker was very frequently making these runs forward to add support, meaning Gakpo was pinned back and couldn't really attack in behind, with Foden in the half space picking up the ball here, and then Kobbie Mainu, who was arguably England's best player last night, and I owe him a massive apology because I was not familiar with his game coming into the Euros. You know, it's always hard to separate Man United hype from actual talent, but Mainu, I hold my hands up, he looks unbelievable. And last night, he was extremely key for England, specifically in the counter press, being able to regain the ball high up the pitch for England, but even in possession, his aggressive position out here meant that it made it very easy for England to outnumber Holland's midfield. And there's a lot of clips and a lot of examples of England getting a lot of players in close proximity, being able to free up a player between the lines to pick up the ball, be it Mainu driving forward with the ball or Foden having space to turn and attack in behind. For example, there was an excellent chance for Foden early on in the match with Mainu driving forward and finding Foden with space to attack forward, and if it weren't for an excellent stop on the line by Dumfries, England would have been 2-1 up at this point. And these midfield overloads were extremely evident in the first half, and there's no better example than how England were able to get their goal and the move that led to the penalty. And we can see in the moment that the Netherlands push up to close Declan Rice, it leaves Jude Bellingham in acres of space to receive the ball and drive forward. As England play it forward into Saka, who's ready to be in a 1v1 against Ake on the right because of his advanced position, then he cuts inside and England are able to get the penalty. I want you to let me know in the comments if you think this was a penalty, because personally I don't think it was, because Kane had already kicked the ball. I know Dumfries' foot was high and his studs were up, but by the moment that the chance had already gone, I personally believe that this shouldn't have been given. However, I'm not going to complain too much that they gave England a penalty, and it was a fantastic penalty from Kane to squeeze it in the bottom left corner. Now from this moment, England continued to dominate, and these overloads from Mainu, Bellingham and Foden started to pop up all over the pitch. And it was the moment in which Depay went down with an injury that turned out to be a blessing in disguise for Koeman, and the most logical substitution for the injury to Depay would have been Weghorst up top. However, Koeman decided to put on an extra midfielder, so Depay made way for Veerman in the centre. Now this meant that the Netherlands did switch their shape quite significantly, and started to have Malen up top with Gakpo and Simons on the right, with Veerman giving more support in the centre. Now because of Declan Rice's more defensive position compared to Mainu, it meant that Simons would often pick up Declan Rice in this position, and the Netherlands switched to a more passive 3v2 in the first phase of the press, meaning England could control the game, but it made it a lot harder for them to progress the ball forward, because now the Netherlands had done something extremely clever and had gone man for man in the centre, meaning England now had no space to progress the ball through the middle. And this was the theme of the match for the vast majority of the second half as well. And we can see this change instantly at the end of the first half, with any run from Bellingham, Foden or Mainu instantly being covered, and England already being a lot more cautious in what they wanted to do because they had no space to progress the ball centrally like they had been doing up to that point. This meant that England became a little bit more passive in their possession. Yes, England were still able to control the game because they had this man advantage in the first phase of build-up, but it meant it was a lot harder for them to create overloads out wide. Specifically, even if the ball moved over to Saka, then Foden instantly had his player covered, Harry Kane would try and shift over, even if Mainu tried to make a run forward, Veerman would be ready, and even Kyle Walker's position was picked up by Gakpo, and it was a lot harder for England to find space. And this meant that the second half was a lot more cagey for both teams, and there weren't really any major chances. The Netherlands were able to create a few chances from set pieces and look dangerous on occasion, and this started to frustrate England. And in the second half, they started to resort to older patterns that meant that they were less dangerous going forward. Now, in the second half, there weren't any major changes until the last 10 minutes, but the only change was Trippier coming off for Luke Shaw on the left flank. Now, as we mentioned earlier, this change didn't really do much because England weren't able to create overloads, and Luke Shaw, he did get forward a few times, but didn't have a massive impact in the game. But the main difference in the second half and why they were less effective going forward was mostly down to, in my opinion, the position of Harry Kane. Now, we do know that Harry Kane likes to drop deep to receive the ball, but in the first half, he did this quite reservedly in the sense that he'd maybe drop a little bit between the lines to pick up the ball just in front of the midfield before shifting it out wide into Trippier or Saka. But in the second half, he started to drop deep a lot more, and you often saw him acting essentially as the holding midfielder at times coming down here, and it meant England had less players on the defensive line because as Foden and Bellingham started to get tired, they weren't pushing forward as consistently as maybe they were in the first half. Mainu was struggling to find the same space that he did in the first half because he was being man-marked, and England essentially had no free players in the centre, which again completely closed off the game and made it extremely difficult for both teams to find space and move forward. But then all it took was two fantastic substitutions by Southgate to put Palmer on for Foden and Watkins up top for Harry Kane. And now England finally had someone that was running in behind. And this was clearly evident from the moment that Watkins and Palmer came onto the pitch. And it didn't take long for these two players to link up. Palmer picking up the ball in the right inside channel and Watkins making a fantastic diagonal run into the box before finishing extremely nicely in the bottom left corner to put England 2-1 up with only 2 minutes left on the clock and into the European final against Spain. There were definitely a lot of areas of improvement in this English team that did look a lot more dangerous in the first half going forward, but they definitely have their work cut out in the final going up against the best team in the competition, which is Spain. So let me know your score predictions in the comments down below.